afternoon and good morning to our folks on the West Coast. My name is Caitlin Donnelly, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today. I'm told that my audio message at the beginning of the webinar was a little bit glitchy, so I'm just going to repeat a couple things. Just making sure that we aren't having any audio or tech issues. All right, how does that sound, Kimberly? Still looping? All right, okay, looks good. Thank you everyone who's thumbs upping me and in the chat. We love live events because you never know what may happen. Always room for some technical difficulties, but we will move through them. So once again, thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today, talking about voter engagement in small towns and rural areas. My name's Caitlin Donnelly. I am the Senior Program Director for Nonprofit Vote, and really happy to be with you all today. If you have any technical issues, are having trouble hearing our speakers, you can put that in the chat box. And if you have any questions for me or our speakers, we ask you to put that in the Q&A box so that it's easier for me to review those and moderate them out. We're online right now. We're live streaming on Facebook. So should you need to access this video before we send out the recording and slides, you can do that by just finding us on Facebook at NP Vote, or you can find us on Twitter at NP Vote. We would love to follow you or hear from you on social media. And as I said, this webinar is being recorded, so you will receive this recording as well as the slides after the webinar, probably sometime mid next week. And Kimberly has just put in the chat box our Facebook URL. So I am going to dive in just a moment. First, can I ask our host to enable captions? Oh, it is, captions are on, great. We are live and recording, so we can start our screen share, Junshen, and get into today's presentation. So we have some guest panelists today, and I am excited to introduce them in a few moments. But first, I want to talk about just some general framing for our topic today, voter engagement in rural areas and small towns. So we are doing this as part of a larger project that we call Nonprofit Power. In 2021, we released a report called Nonprofit Power, looking at our field program, where we were working with over 100 nonprofit organizations, most of them human service organizations, across 7 states. And we found that these organizations were doing incredible work reaching underserved voters, voters who were low income, people of color, younger, had lower education attainment, and all these other factors that are historically associated with lower voter turnout rates. So we saw that our nonprofits were reaching people who may really need some voter engagement assistance. And we saw that as a result of that engagement, the rate of turnout was boosted for those voters that they engaged. So compared to their other voters in their district with similar demographic profiles, the voters contacted by our nonprofits were more likely to turn out. So we think of this as the nonprofit power, our power as nonprofits to engage our communities and get them voting. We also saw that the work that staff and leaders at these nonprofits is really incredible. So we want to highlight that. So on the next slide, we have our goals for nonprofit power. So first, we're trying to uplift nonprofits doing voter engagement in niche spaces or often overlooked spaces. So we're starting with these smaller communities that tend to be overlooked. In future webinars and reportlets that we're dropping this year, we're going to also be looking at immigrant communities and voters with disabilities. We want to really educate the sector about the necessity of voter engagement in these spaces, show that every community deserves representation, and hopefully inspire some nonprofits that may see themselves in some of these organizations we're featuring, and realizing that there are some steps they can take to integrate voter engagement in the incredible community work they are already doing. And to help make that happen, we're trying to provide some tailored strategies that have been tested by these nonprofits that they're finding are really effective, so that we can have this hub of tried and tested strategies, so that some of the general guidance that we've put out maybe in the past hasn't really resonated for certain organizations. Well, maybe through these reports in this space, you can find something that is going to really work for your specific context. Next slide. So diving into this first set of sort of reports, I've been calling them drops. They're also profiles. We're looking at rural and small towns because they are most overlooked areas by major parties. We know there are tons of people focusing on Atlanta metro area, Detroit, large cities all across this country, but small towns and rural areas are often passed over, flown over by these candidates and parties. And a lot of these towns and rural areas are facing barriers to thriving in their everyday lives. There might be limited access to food, healthcare, or transportation. So real concerns that these voters have trying to maintain their existence and support their families. And we know that policy can make a big impact on their lives. These areas also have some of the closest elections, compared to cities that are often seen as, always voting one way. Maybe your vote doesn't really matter in these places. We actually see these rural areas and small towns have incredibly close elections where the margins are small, and a little bit of voter engagement effort could actually really change the outcome. Next slide, please. So it's a little, we tried to get a grasp on how many small towns and rural areas are in this country. It's a little hard to grasp because definitions vary between federal departments. The census has one definition. Any place with a population of less than 5,000 people is rural. The USDA is looking at, density. So 2,500 to 50,000 with a density of 500 people per square mile is a small town. Fewer than 2,500 residents is rural. And then Office of Management and Budget has another definition. Any county without a metropolitan core is rural. So the definition really varies depending on who you ask. But we know that they're very prevalent across the country. On our next slide, we have some maps. So you can see the map on the left is showing small towns spread out in every state across the country. And on the right, you see that there's around 2,000 rural counties, and they take up most of the landmass of this country. So small towns and rural areas are essentially all around us, all across the country. And despite their small size, there are very meaningful political and policy impacts that result from voters here either participating or not participating. So the next slide shows you just how close some of these races can be. There is, we have this graph here that I find really interesting, and it shows that in yellow, the difference of voters between two parties in the presidential elections in 2020. So for instance, Clay County, Georgia, only 154 votes separated the person who won that county versus the person who lost. And 536 eligible voters in that county didn't participate. In Keweenaw County in Michigan, 190 voters essentially decided the election, and 554 voters weren't part of that election. And in Hyde County, North Carolina, 372 decided, 1,053 sat out. So there's about 2 or 3 times as many eligible voters as there are the number of voters, 2 or 3 times the number of eligible voters who did not participate in the 2020 presidential contest compared to the number of voters in that county or district that, decided how the race went in that community. So it's only a few hundred votes to change the party majority. So the leads between candidates are really small. Often, like so many places, local elections have even fewer voters turning out. And so even tighter margins compared to these bigger federal elections. So especially in a year like 2023, there's a big impact that can be made, and real change can occur if these voters are engaged. Next slide, please. So we talked to a number of a few nonprofits in these small towns and rural areas. And we really were able to draw out some patterns that we think are probably pretty instructive for other groups that might want to start engaging voters, but aren't exactly sure what is the best way to do that. You probably aren't going to have a massive campaign doing door knocking, especially if you're in a rural area where the density is lower and so people are more spread out. So we want to make sure that there are space for one-on-one conversations, especially between people who know each other. So if you work at a nonprofit in one of these communities, you probably are very familiar with the people that you are serving day in, day out. So taking a moment to have a one-on-one conversation where you can meet their holistic needs and connect them to other resources is going to be a big game changer. Equip yourself during those conversations with some physical materials to distribute information, especially if your community has less internet access, either because you don't have broadband in the community, or residents are just have a lower rate of having internet access at home. Physical materials can be really helpful as a visual aid and for some information that they can take with them after that conversation. You can also increase the tech literacy in your community by teaching voters and assisting voters with accessing some of that information online. So showing them how your Secretary of State's portal works. Perhaps they want to request a mail ballot, and there's a way that they can do that online. Get familiar with that process yourself so that then you can show others how they can leverage the technology and not have to do everything going into the county clerk's office or to the local election board. Next slide, please. Candidate engagement came up again and again, especially when we're talking about small local races. Most people in the community know everyone. These elected officials or people running for office might be neighbors you already know and work with. So find opportunities for your nonprofit clients or staff to actually engage with these local candidates and officials. And overall, what you have as an asset that no major party has is trust in your community. You are there every day. You are there year after year. You do not go away when an election is won or lost. And you have a lot of trust with your community. So if you can link voting to something safe and familiar, whether that's your own organization or other trusted messengers, organizations, or businesses in your community, you can make voting feel more inclusive, safe, and inviting. So consider organizing your voter engagement efforts around local events or businesses. You don't have to make an event that is exclusively about voting. You can bring voting into existing events that are really celebratory for your community and that you already know people are energized and motivated to come out to. Next slide, I want to just acknowledge one of the organizations that was really instrumental to our work on small towns and rural areas. Kyra Wallace is the president and CEO of Southwest Michigan Urban League. In the report, you will be able to read a profile about Southwestern Michigan Urban League and the voter engagement work they've been doing. But they really assist African Americans and other disadvantaged Americans in achieving socioeconomic equality, and that includes voting. And they're in a small town of about 52,000 people. It's the headquarters of Kellogg's, so it smells like cereal in the morning. And it's a community that's large enough to, they confront some major issues that you see in other areas of the country, yet they're small enough to really be able to tackle those issues. They have that flexibility and nimbleness. So we gained a lot of wisdom and insight from Kyra. Unfortunately, she was not able to join us for the webinar today, but we did want to give her a shout out and the great work, her and the great work of Southwestern Michigan Urban League. So you're probably ready to hear from some people who are actually doing this work in the field. So I'm excited to introduce our panelists now. So our first panelist, Dwayne, is the Senior Database Administrator for Hunger Free Colorado and brings a unique lens to food security, health equity, and technology. Dwayne is a formerly incarcerated person who has navigated state and private prisons, community corrections, and reentry. As a first-gen college graduate, he holds a BS in Computer Information Systems from Metro State University of Denver. He is the co-founder of Small Town Project, which works to improve health equity in Southeast Colorado by increasing access to healthy foods and empowering the community. Dwayne also serves his community as mayor pro tem for the city of Rocky Ford and as an advisory member for the Valley-wide health systems and on the advisory council for Otero College. Dwayne, thank you for being here and for representing Small Town Project.
Caitlin, yeah, thank you for having me. Happy to join you all today.
All right, our next speaker is Marty Dombrowski. Marty is the Assistant Director for the Center of Independent Living in South Central Pennsylvania. It is her passion and privilege to assist individuals with disabilities to gain and maintain skills that open opportunities to living full lives in the community, including learning and practicing self-advocacy skills. She is a graduate of Arcadia University, Philadelphia, and the University of Pittsburgh. She enjoys an active life in rural Pennsylvania. Marty, do you want to pop on screen and wave and say hi?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me today. Happy Wednesday.
Great. So Dwayne, why don't you come back as well? And we are going to dive into some questions. If you have any questions for our speakers, please put those in the Q&A box. I have a couple questions that I wanted to ask first off, but we'll get to yours as well. So let's start with this first one. And we'll start with you, Dwayne. What challenges are unique to your community that makes voter engagement challenging?
Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, so to get started, when we think about those, I guess, unique challenges for Rocky Ford and rural Southeast Colorado, I think one of those is going to be just the lack of infrastructure, and then the others, lack of capacity for voter engagement. I think those, along with a complacency mindset, that just everyone knows how to vote, and it's just common knowledge. So really not thinking that anything needs to be done to increase that outreach. We're a small rural city, and we don't have the same resources for voter engagement as larger cities. We also have a pretty large population of rural, low-income minority voters who are also facing additional barriers to voting. I think of those such as like transportation. We're a rural and almost frontier county and community. So access to transportation, language barriers. Of course, we have a high monolingual Spanish-speaking population here. When we combine those things, we see how hard it can be to really engage voters. And then something else that I'm not sure if it's unique. It's something that they were fighting against 50 years ago and in the 60s. But we're still seeing some challenges coming from I think pressures from maybe landlords or employers that ultimately intimidates people into not openly engaging if their vote might be opposite, or if that opinion might be along with the minority party or the minority side if it's a valid issue.
Thank you. I want to dive into that last point about maybe some of the friction that voters face. But first, Marty, can you also answer this question about what challenges are unique to your community that makes voter engagement challenging?
Sure, I'm going to echo a lot of what Dwayne said, but I'm also going to add lack of confidence of where to go for answers, complex answers, like how do I decide who to vote for? How can I make an informed decision? To easy things like where's my polling place? And so for a lot of the folks that we serve, that lack of confidence of who to ask or where to turn, or will people think I'm dumb if I don't know the answers, or if I ask this question. Another big thing for our area of Pennsylvania, the 7 counties that I'm representing, is transportation. So to get to the polling place and or to get connected, that's not transportation, but to get connected to the process on how to do a mail-in ballot, or what that looks like, is sometimes insurmountable for certain people, especially people living rurally and with people that might identify as having a disability.
So I'm hearing from both of you that there are some structural issues that we think of often, such as language access for voters who are not English speakers, as well as transportation access. So barriers like that. But you also sort of both touched on fear, the fear of retaliation and the fear of, not looking smart or not looking informed or like an educated voter. How have you addressed those issues in the past? Dwayne, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm looking at that as a kind of a current, a current challenge and work that's, kind of being undertaken, now as we move forward. When I look at kind of what we're doing now, I think a lot of that is that education, and that's coming when earlier I was talking about some of those challenges, and I talk about capacity, and that's from the government level of not really investing in local elections, and then with the organizations in the community, not necessarily having the capacity to get involved on that side of voter outreach, and engagement. So, really increasing that education and that capacity is huge. Looking at, I think also looking at education alongside of the organizations. We, Small Town Project, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. When you think about it, or if you hear anything election side, without a whole lot of knowledge of the subject, you just automatically think, okay, we gotta stay hands off on this. But in really understanding it and learning how to engage voters in a nonpartisan way, you see where those local organizations that do have that trust with the community are able to engage and help spread that education around, just registering even, and then looking through the blue book, learning what you're reading, and then learning how to access additional resources on your own. I think that's a big part of this, of how it's being addressed now, and kind of I think where some of the priority focus is going.
And Marty, how do you sort of approach voter education to alleviate some of those fears, as well as some of the more structural barriers?
Well, we really concentrate on building the network, building the strength with community partners to make sure that everyone is aware that this issue exists and that we all have a part in making things better. One of our greatest community partners are the libraries. We found that everybody understands what a library is. It's a safe place. It's a community hub. And so it's a good place to go to get information. And so we kind of wiggle our way in and sprinkle our information, share it with the librarians so that they're able in turn to share that and then connect people back to either our Center for Independent Living or to other community partners. Before I was talking about the hesitancy that a lot of people felt when it came to the voting process. And so those self-advocacy skills, we love to teach those and love to grow with people. And so when one thinks of voting and the entire process and how it all works and how beautiful that process is, and one also kind of parallels that with self-advocacy skills. It's kind of one and the same. It's speaking up for oneself and learning, taking charge, and being able to express one's opinion. That's a beautiful thing. And so that's what we're trying to grow and strengthen.
So Marty, you I'm wondering if libraries are one of the places where you're able to leverage more internet access. And can you just tell us about, your experience working with communities with low internet access and how to, make sure they're getting that information? So you mentioned the libraries, and are there other ways you're helping them harness technology to learn more about elections?
Absolutely. We say around here, you don't know what you don't know. And so a lot of people just assume that everybody has connectivity and has access to technology to do research, to check on a date when something might be due. And that's just not true. And so what we've been able to do is to get to write some grants, to find some funding, to buy devices, and or to have the libraries have hotspots that they can lend out to patrons. And then also have a team of volunteers and or bring in students from school districts to teach skills, to teach those technology skills to the people. But it really kind of, we're finding the best place for us to share all those skills and all that connectivity is the library.
That's great. We love our local libraries. It's great when voters can, proactively access this information. But I think in general, we either assume or hope that, news outlets are covering these local elections, and that, information about voting isn't solely coming from our nonprofits or from government entities like the elections office or political parties. But Dwayne, I know local news isn't as prominent in your area. So how does that change the information environment around local elections?
Yeah, earlier we're talking about trying to think of some of the unique challenges and at where we can kind of go on and on with those. I think this is another one of those. Local news, isn't prominent. If we're looking at news channels, for us, Southern Colorado, we're covered by Colorado Springs, which is a city about 95 miles northwest of us. So where come election time, people in Rocky Ford, people in Otero County, people in Southeast Colorado, we can tell you all about the candidates from Colorado Springs and El Paso County. But when we're looking at our local candidates, in the city elections, school board elections, county elections, that information's not there. We have one print newspaper that's still in existence. That reach has diminished, and aside from that, it's just not there. So where we, I guess, have to kind of pick up that slack or lack of access to information there, is a lot of direct conversations, and I think a lot of people are still, maybe relying on maybe associations or organizations that they, they're members of, to look for who they're endorsing. Aside from that, there's not a whole lot. There's one candidate, I guess a panel, a candidate forum that's been hosted by an area Knights of Columbus organization that has been going on for probably last few decades, and even with that, just the outreach and I guess the marketing side of that forum happening isn't there. So with that, it's another one of those things where the people who know it's happening, they're there, the ones who, haven't missed a vote in 10, 20 years, they're there and they're not missing. So, we're really missing that news reaching the new voters. We have our 17 year olds now that'll be turning 18 before November. And we have others that, are getting back into voting, and, that news isn't there for them.
So you mentioned working with candidates and elected officials, so that's a nice segue. You are an elected official, a local official, Dwayne. So how has that changed your perspective on voting, and what are ways that you're thinking of that might make voter participation higher in those local elections in Rocky Ford?
Yeah, I would say I am where I am because of the way things have been in this area, and areas that look like this probably all across the country. And again, it's that thing of the people who are involved are the ones that have been involved, and with that, the ones who have been making decisions for everyone else. And that call was put out there. Well, if you got involved, then you can perhaps address this, the lack of what we're missing. So with that, I really feel like as a local official, elected official, we have a responsibility to kind of break that barrier down. We hear that maybe that phrase of my door's always open, or you always know how to reach me. And I don't believe that is conducive to like actually engaging people, or when we talk about wanting to be inclusive and get as many people to the table or involved as possible. I really feel like we have a responsibility and an obligation to directly reach out to those citizens, to see what questions they have, what information they feel like is missing. And I think with that, truly be inclusive and kind of create that environment where people people believe that they're actually being heard. And especially after decades of feeling ignored, I think local officials need to take responsibility for reaching out and making people want to want to ask questions, want to really learn, and want to get involved. And then the other side of that is actually see their voice turn into action and change.
That leads me nicely into my next question, which is for Marty. So on this idea of, making local elections and local election officials more open and inclusive and accessible, can you tell us a little bit about your work making voting machines more accessible, Marty, what that was like and what it was like to get in contact with local government about that issue?
Absolutely. We contacted the Board of Election for each of the counties, and then asked if we could set up practice runs for individuals. I saw in the chat somebody asked about our collaboration with churches and the faith-based initiative. We call that the FBI, faith-based initiative. And so we helped to organize the County Board of Election to have practice sessions everywhere. Anywhere and everywhere, places where people meet. So at basketball games, at events where people would already be traveling, there could be the process was there, how to do it, what it looks like, how it works, and ask questions. A lot of places and a lot of people think that one size fits all. So if somebody identifies as being part of the deaf community, that one solution will work for that person, but actually everybody, back to my self-advocacy skills, everybody is allowed to request the accommodations that work for them. And so getting the people at the election sites to understand and respect and to listen to what might be needed for particular individuals so that their access could be accessible was really important. And so it just was the beginning of a lot of conversations.
Thank you for sharing that. We're getting a lot of questions from the audience, which is excellent. So I'm going to move into a few of those. So we had someone ask about cultural attitudes and asking, is voting seen as important enough to take time from other activities? Is there a cynicism? And, you know, how do maybe different groups, potentially different minority groups or other, you know, unique communities that you're serving, how do their beliefs about voting differ? And either of you can jump in on this one.
Do you want me? I think I've said the word process a lot, but it's a process. It's an invitation to, if somebody has been reluctant in the past and has not seen voting as as something worth their time or something that was meant for them, it's an invitation from the community to at least consider and to think about it. And that one-on-one invitation or that one-on-one connection with other humans to discuss why it's important, that whole dialogue might change somebody's ideas, might change somebody's values, and might be just the invitation or the nudge that they were looking for to just to think about it and to open someone's mind.
Dwayne, what's your take on this? You did reference that you work with a lot of monolingual individuals and also the, you know, concern about possible retaliation. So what, you know, what's the vibe? How are people thinking about voting in Rocky Ford?
Yeah, that was one that, you know, I guess I was able to experience firsthand, just, you know, what that attitude is. And then, you know, I see this word in the question, that the cynicism, and that, you know, really hits it. You know, so when I was originally running for city council, you know, I had to go collect my signatures to petition on, and I thought it would be, you know, I have more than 25 relatives and family members here in Rocky Ford, and you know, I thought that's no problem. You know, I'll be able to go clear 100 signatures easy. You know, just to have that padding. And it really opened my eyes to just where that engagement was among, you know, my family and my friends and some of my elders. You know, talking to one of my tias, she's telling me, like, you know, Hito, I haven't voted since probably like 1980, since before around the time you were born. And you know, I'm asking, you know, well, you know, why? And it's really that that apathy that grows, and that cynicism of, you know, for one, our vote doesn't count, and two, you know, where we live, especially, you know, our vote really doesn't count. You know, so why waste my time? And, you know, when we think about, is it seen as important enough to take time from other activities? I think about, you know, taking time off of work. We have a lot of manufacturing, a lot of agricultural work here, a lot of hourly work. And although, you know, by law, employers do need to, you know, allow for that time off, you know, it doesn't need to be paid. So, you know, is someone going to trade, you know, work hours to go and vote? or, you know, they know that the polls are open until 7 p.m. I can just try to make it there. And, you know, at the end of the day, 5:30 comes, 6 o'clock comes, and, you know, am I tired and, you know, do I want to go home? Or am I going to go over here and stand in line? And that's really, you know, what we see. So yeah, definitely, even looking at some of the leagues, you know, if we have adult softball, you know, a lot of the people they would prefer to go, you know, catch their game, rather than, you know, hit the polling locations after work. So that's a lot of what we're battling. And yeah, definitely when we look at the beliefs in the area, we're probably about a good 80-20 to 70-30 split along party lines in this area. We haven't, we're a highly conservative area. On the state level, we haven't had a Democratic candidate, you know, reach state or federal Congress since probably the 70s or 80s. You know, so when we have you know, more liberal voters, again, yeah, that you can look at the numbers and say, you know, does my vote really matter? So I think with that, it's trying to bring it back to really the local elections, to show them that, yeah, that one vote does matter. Here in Rocky Ford, our, you know, each year we're a population of about 5,000. We draw out about 900 for our local elections. You know, so I think I had shared in earlier, well, sorry, not in this conversation, but for our mayor in 2019, the split was about 20 votes. You know, so when we look at that, that's when we can really, you know, give them you know, tangible data that, like, hey, your voice really does matter. And you know, if you're a household with 3 or 4 adults in here, your household, you know, really does weigh into the outcomes of these elections.
Thank you. We have some questions about disinformation, which I think is a nice, interesting pairing with this idea of voter apathy. We actually say voter alienation, because we think of voters as being alienated from the political process. It's not that they don't care because they just don't care. Like, there are structural and, you know, cultural reasons for that, like you said, Dwayne. But Marty, are you seeing people who are being targeted with disinformation, misinformation, and how have you responded to that in the past?
We are person-centered, and so that means people make decisions based on what they choose to do, and we respect and uphold that. However, in order to make decisions, one needs all the information that's available, or a good balance of information. So oftentimes people will read, we have several support groups, and people will come in because they've read something on the internet that is the absolute 100% truth, and they just can't believe it. And meanwhile, I'm thinking that's absolutely 100% not true. And so just being able to give people the opportunities to look at things from the other viewpoint, or from to keep an open mind and to be able to investigate information a little bit further, a little bit more, to get up to understand how information is sometimes presented to sway a point, or to you know, get a vote. But just to educate people and to help them become aware that there are other points of view, and that it's a good idea to keep an open mind, to accept those, and then think about it, and then make the choice or the decision based on getting a more complete information. That's always a better way to make a decision.
Thank you. So we are swiftly nearing the end of our time, and I want to ask one or two more questions before we wrap up. So if for our audience, if I didn't get to your question, I will try to address it after the webinar. But we did have a question about use of social media. So I'm curious, are either of you using social media to reach voters, and what have you found is most effective with social media?
I can jump on that one. Yeah, thanks for asking that question. And I really think that was a big miss on an earlier question about that lack of information or lack of news in our area. Social media is that tool that has been used to counter that. So social media use has really grown among candidates or sides of a ballot initiative, as well as a couple local news groups that are growing just through social media. So really being able to connect people to through that entire process of the education, getting registered, knowing how to update their information, having those links live and just readily available in different places. Small town project, that's something that we will actively do starting about August. We'll be doing our voter outreach, and that's we use a link tree where voters can go and register, update voter information. They can learn about initiatives, learn about candidates, and connect to all those different sources. So that's one that we're able to put out there, and we really are seeing that growth there. Kind of takes me back again to like the capacity of our local nonprofits of not having someone on the staff or a volunteer available to really invest the time needed on social media. So that is growing, but we know that there's still a lot of work to do there. But definitely, I think social media is that tool that is really bridging that divide from the city and urban areas down here for us. And we know a lot of people are looking to it for for day-to-day news and for information that they're trying to find.
Marty, are you also using social media?
We do. It's whatever is the best way for people to access information and to get what they need when they need it. We say we're all in. And so, yes, social media has really made a difference for a lot of people. We like answers quickly these days. And so it's the best and fastest way to get a lot of information.
All right, so I want to end on a hopeful note. However, I've seen so many questions in our queue are really about, voters experiencing that cynicism, thinking that elected officials don't care about them. So in just a few words, I'd like each of you to give a mini pep talk to this audience. Let's say that they are also in a small town or rural area, and the voters that they engage with, the prospective voters, have those feelings like they are being overlooked and that their vote doesn't matter. And so this people are thinking, why should my nonprofit even do this? Like, how can you motivate them? What's the pep talk you would give them so that they say, even though there are these challenges, it's important and I'm going to stick it through.
Do you want me to go first? I can jump
Sure.
in here. I would
Sure.
say you matter, your opinion matters, what you think matters, what you feel matters. And if we add up everybody that does matter and we all matter, then we can do something. We can make a change. We can be the change.
Yeah, I really try to stress the importance of our right to vote. You know, people of color, you know, weren't able to vote prior to a certain time. Women weren't able to vote prior to a certain time. You know, formerly incarcerated people weren't allowed to vote prior to a certain time. You know, so those are now, you know, inherent rights that we have, and you know, we have an obligation to use those. There was a lot of people that that really fought for us to, you know, for those rights to be restored. You know, so we owe them, we owe our elders to step up and we are the prayers now that our elders prayed for them. You know, so it is our obligation to get out there and get involved.
Thank you. These are great words for us to end on that really encapsulate, I think, nonprofit power. So once again, thank you, Marty. Thank you, Dwayne, and to everyone who joined us on this webinar. The recording will be out next week, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.